I kind of want to get straight to it because you've had an interesting week on the heels of us talking about potential Saudi deals, Grand Slams unifying to create a different tour. You actually got to sit down with one of the main players. Who was it, and what were your takeaways?
I spoke with Lew Sherr, who's CEO of the USTA, but also is clearly becoming the front-facing figure for the Premier Tour. You'll recall from previous episodes, this is the great disruptor. This is sort of the four majors getting together, which is a stop and pause moment. We don't often see that. Not a typo, not a verbal typo. The four majors all on the same page. They're taking then the next 10 events, the thousands, they're combining them. They're adding one, likely in the UK, and they're basically creating a 14-event tour. Throw in a team event and a year-end finals. These will be, this is a proposal, mind you, so this isn't necessarily a done deal, but the idea is tennis needs to get streamlined. Tennis needs to be easier for fans to find, and there's way too much clutter. We're going to condense everything. 14 events, open to the top 100 or 200 or so players. All events will be mixed, equal prize money, outdoors. I mean, look, there is a lot to like. There are also a lot of questions, of legal hurdles. We could pick this apart on a number of issues. I just want to sidebar, like you and I, we love forehands and backhands and match results and players making runs. It doesn't always have to be about tennis politics, but also this is enormous. I mean, we talk about disruptions. I mean, this is for a sport that doesn't necessarily like to do change. This is absolutely seismic. I mean, this was just completely blow tennis up as we know it. So this is one proposal on the table. The other, which I hope to talk with someone on the record about soon, is this Saudi billion-dollar proposal, which keeps the tour model intact, but also will be a bit of a disruption. But this Premier Tour, which has been much discussed, and again, some of it makes a lot of sense, and some of it I think would be absolutely potentially catastrophic. So I spoke to Lew. He made his case. I included some of the Q&A online. And if this goes through, this will completely change tennis, whether it's for better or for ill. This will be unrecognizable.
Yeah, I read through the interview, and by all accounts, Lew has a great reputation. I don't know him well. There's certainly a reason in a room full of very smart, intelligent, kind of macro issue thinking people why he's the one out front talking to you and kind of representing their vision. I agree with a lot of his points, right? I agree, if you can give players a guaranteed off season of 2.5, 3 months, how often as a player did I want that? And how often do we hear players talking about that now? It is absurd that the best players on earth have what is essentially an 11-month season, right? Like Jannik Sinner played through Davis Cup last year and then had 4 weeks off before starting his Australian Open, his maiden Grand Slam run, where he's having to not play beforehand just to recover in time and make sure he's match fit for it. So the schedule in tennis is more demanding and absurd on a lot of different levels. I hear NFL teams talking about, that West Coast time change. I'm like, man, you think that's bad? You should try Memphis and Dubai. Memphis on a Saturday, and then I've literally been asleep in a players' lounge face down in Dubai, and my coach kicked me and said, "You're on." That's real. So there are inefficiencies in the calendar, right? And it's gotten to the point where everyone is racing for space. And 20 years on, that race for space has manifested in there is no off time for players to actually, it is short-sighted. Injuries, when we have all the technological advances to get people back sooner, right? So we're seeing players play longer. I largely think that's by virtue of, a knee operation used to be like a guaranteed you're out 6 months, and now it's like 4 weeks. But we do need to kind of take the long view on our stars. So I understand what he's saying. It is hard to follow. It is weird when simultaneously there's an event in Rotterdam with Sinner, and then there's one in, Rio and Alcaraz, and you can't keep up with who's winning what, where, why, when. Davis Cup has been fucked for a long time and impossible to follow. So I understand the reasoning for a lot of this, right? I understand the premise for conversation. I'm not one who is still defending Blockbuster. Stuff changes. We need to adapt. We need to get better. The couple of questions that I have in the fallout from reading your interview is, what happens to lower level events, right? So 500s and below, is that just open season? Like who takes those over, right? And is that just left in the dust? Because as much as we complain about not having an off season, you're also going to want more than most players are going to want more than 12 or 14 events. It's just the way it is, right? I understand the money, but you need those reps also. Like, I was someone who, the more I played, the better I played. I wasn't, one of these Novak Roger types where, they get hurt, show up 6 months later and win a slam straight out of the shooter. Like, most of Earth doesn't operate that way. So what happens to the smaller tour events? And then the ATP Tour is the one who supports the Challenger Tours and the can you make it tours. Do they have a care in the world or a plan for what happens with the fallout from this deal at lower levels?
I asked that question, and honestly, I did not, I probably could have pushed a little harder. I'm not sure I got much of a response. There is this sort of, developmental tour for players who don't essentially get their tour card. So the guys, women too, who are, 101 to 300, we'll call it. And presumably they would play what are now 250s and 500s. But that's a real problem. I mean, the whole theory here is sort of less is more. The top 4 events, the 4 majors plus 6 of the thousands make in excess of 80% of the revenue. So you've got more than 100 events, but 10 of them are driving more than 80% of the revenue. Something's not working efficiently here. So streamline. Scarcity has its virtues. The problem is that, first of all, we're either killing off or demoting more than 100 tournaments. Here are these events. They've been in these communities. I mean, Arthur Ashe started the DC event even in the Middle East. I was looking it up because apparently the folks who run Doha and Dubai are furious about Saudi Arabia sort of jumping the line. Do you know there's been an event in Doha for 1993? So for 30 plus years, these guys have been loyal. They've held sanctions. They've bought and sold sanctions. I mean, imagine if you're the person who paid millions and millions of dollars for Newport, and all of a sudden you realize your event is being demoted. So, I mean, I can't imagine if this Premier Tour happens, what this is going to look like legally. You're basically blowing up the tour model that's been tennis for decades. I mean, I'm curious. So let me throw a question to you. We've heard very little of this has been a lot of the guys wearing the Brioni suits in the conference rooms with the orchid on their room service tray. We haven't heard a lot from the players. What do you think? Do you think the players are going to go for this? I mean, it sounds, basically the pitch is basically you're going to play these 14 events anyway. You'll double your money and you'll get a guaranteed off season, and you'll get a guaranteed buffer week or 2 weeks before and after each major. The hitch is there ain't going to be a Mets and a Dallas, and I mean, there won't be an event in Japan. Japan's a pretty big market. There are all these events in South America that we love. Tennis won't really be going through South America. I'm curious from your perspective, do the players go for this?
It depends. I have so many questions that I've written down as you're talking. You said there's separate tour from 1 to 300. Well, if there's not a tour for people below 300, how the hell do you know someone's 300? Like, I don't know how you break into that. I don't know. Like it's so on and so forth. There has to be levels of progression. You don't just start at 70 and it's like, okay, so you have to spend a year on the lower tour to qualify. Well, does Alcaraz win the US Open 2 years ago? By that metric, I don't know. 80% of revenue comes from 4 events. What percentage of Major League Baseball revenue comes from 5 teams? I don't know. I bet it's a decent comp. One of the questions that you asked was basically what happens to the TV contracts, and I'm regurgitating as I remember it, so correct me where I'm wrong. But the gist of the question was somewhere along the lines of what happens to the TV contracts that the ATP Tour has. Are they going to be in debt? Are they going to get sued? Are they going to, there's a million questions. And his answer to that was basically there are inefficiencies, right? So I'm going, yeah, but you didn't actually answer the question. And it sounded like, kind of tough shit. This is capitalism. This is what we're doing. Money talks, bullshit walks, and we have the slams. So I like the idea. I'm not against changing tours, making a new type of model for the tour. What I don't like is the ATP working on something somewhere, the USTA working on something somewhere, and all of a sudden it feels like a bit of a race when a lot of major issues haven't been solved for. I don't want to say haven't been thought about, but haven't been solved for, and now all of a sudden we're going on record with these ideas. This isn't happening behind the scenes. This isn't something where it's like we need time behind the scenes in boardrooms, meeting with players, doing all this. It seems like the players are getting the information from your interviews and from our Uninformed podcast and from, other sources of media. So I don't disagree with his talking points, which he was intentional about repeating, right? But I just have so many questions about who gets left behind, what does that look like, and then is it just the Wild West outside of these 14 events? And so I have more questions. I've laid those out. Are there? What am I missing?
No, I mean, keep in mind, there's a whole separate model here. And, if it's nap time, let me know and we can edit this. You got to be really inside tennis.
Go.
But keep in mind, there is a whole other model here, which Andrea Gaudenzi is leading. And this is basically Saudi Arabia's, they're in for $1 billion and maybe more. I haven't gotten great clarity on how that will be allocated and distributed, but we got a bag of $1 billion. We're not relying on consulting groups' projections. There is $1 billion on the table. And so the condition is Saudi Arabia wants an event. This is the other model. And it seems to me the obvious compromise here is you give Saudi Arabia their event, you make sure it doesn't come in January, because as we've discussed, a lot of this started because Craig Tiley, who now has sort of been strangely absent from these discussions, a lot of this is all because Craig Tiley got worried the Saudis were going to claim January, his Australian Open run-up was going to get thwarted, and so he went on the offense and tried to come up with this separate Premier Tour model. Anyway, it seems to me the obvious compromise is you take the $1 billion, there's sports washing concerns you'll have to negotiate, you give Saudi Arabia an event, you make sure it's not in January, so Craig Tiley gets his win and he gets to play some defense, and we spare ourselves the idea of blowing up the tours. We spare ourselves the idea that there are going to be dozens and dozens of events that are either going to disappear or get demoted. Can you imagine, this is a really boring topic, can you imagine the lawsuits? You spend whatever it is, $20 million for a sanction, or you are an ATP member who thinks they're getting a nice, healthy six-figure pension every year. Oh, wait, there's no ATP. Your Tennis Channel, ESPN, you've got to deal with the tours. But wait, the tours have basically... Can you imagine the litigation that's going to come out of this? And to me, it's becoming clear there's an obvious solution, which is you take the Saudi $1 billion, you may have to hold your nose, you may have to ask for some sort of conditions. You don't want, I don't know if you saw the story of the chess player today. Clearly there are some real ethical concerns and they have to be addressed. But I just think that we all love change. It's all, ironically here, we always say, tennis it's treading water, and every other sport innovates and tennis stands still and it's subject to disruption. And here these guys come and say, all right, I'll blow it up. Here, you want to start from scratch? Here, these are the events that make money. Players want time off. The calendar's a mess, and I'm going to give you an answer. And everybody says, wait a second, the change is too radical. You're blowing up my backyard event. So I do sympathize a little bit with this Premier Tour, because people ask for change and they finally get it. They say, wait, it's too radical. But I also think the obvious solution here is you have a meeting of the minds, you figure out everyone plays nice together, you somehow combine the men and the women, and the Andrea Gaudenzi model, which is basically this one vision where you take the Saudi $1 billion, you give Saudi Arabia a big 1,000 event, and everybody gets on with their lives. I think that is probably going to be where this ends up.
Yeah, you say, can you imagine the lawsuits? I can't. I can imagine competing tours who don't have much common ground, who strike some deal where nothing has really changed, but it's becoming more and more obvious that the reason they struck a deal is because neither side wanted to go through discovery, legal discovery.
Ask your golfing, but ask our friends on the PGA Tour how that's
exactly. That's what I guess that's what I was referencing. The other thing that keeps going through my mind is you keep mentioning the $1 billion from the Saudis, which is, it's nice to have a dollar amount in hand, and then it's very transparent on where it goes, what it does. Here's what we're giving to the players. You also said double the money. Does that money per tournament? Is that prize money per tournament? If there's 14 events and you can't play 24, is that actually a significant bump? I don't know. The other thing, when you keep mentioning the $1 billion, I'm going in my mind, and you asked basically what was going to fund the Slam version of a new tour, the Premier Tour. And he said, we might not need to take money, but we have talked with enough private equity funds. What fucking number would someone pay to own all 4 Grand Slams? The U.S. Open makes as much money in 2 weeks as the Yankees make in half a season of baseball. What is that number? What is Wimbledon worth on the open market? What is the U.S. Open worth on the open market? And they sure as hell, if they do take money, better be transparent about that number, and they better be transparent about how much of that is going back into the players' pockets. Because we could say, we'll double your money, but we're giving you $2 billion, and we sold them for 12.
Once again, it's striking to me how the player's voice has not been represented here. I think the sort of assumption on all this is the players are going to go where the money is. And if you tell, whether it's Novak Djokovic or the guy who's number 100, listen, you're going to be in Cincinnati on this date, and we'll double the prize money. Everyone
maybe Cincinnati. Maybe it's open market for those 10 events. We're assuming that it's still Cincinnati.
Well, no, because they're the ones who ultimately have to ratify. I mean, the 10 events and we could do an hour on this. The good news is this is a fluid situation. There are meetings both for the Gaudenzi model and for this Premier Tour that are going to be happening in Madrid. There does seem to be a bit of a ticking clock. I mean, I wonder, when the Saudis say, you know what, we don't want a live golf situation, that was a disaster. But boy, this tennis sure is balkanized. When they throw up their hands and say, you know what, we're going to park that $1 billion in UFC, I wonder if leverage doesn't change. But this is a fluid situation. I know players fans would much rather be talking about, Iga and Coco and Sinner and Alcaraz, but I also feel like this is not some little tweak. I mean, this is not, hey, we're going to change the date of the Acapulco event and move it to the summer, which actually did happen, by the way. This is absolutely seismic. I mean, this is a really this is existential for tennis. So I feel like news value, I feel like we need to stay on this, just because if this ends up happening, the sport is going to change dramatically. And there's a lot on the line here.
I am pro change. Absolutely. Like I think tennis forever, and they ruined Davis Cup because of it. It's like, if you just try to tread water long enough, you drown. Right. So I'm not the person that says anything should ever be done because that's the way it's always been done. I think that's antiquated. No one lives their life that way. Progress is the goal. One thing I feel even stronger about is transparency. And so I hope that the players get that throughout the process. I think as long as it's transparent, as long as it's on the up and up, as long as they feel at least included, I would guess that most things could be solved for. But also, the players that are not some of the closest friends in my life are guys that weren't in the top 100. Like the top players are still going to listen to players that could be out of a job or not know where they're going, or you have to have a support system to build up the top 100 players, right? And it's imperfect in its current form. I would love to see someone solve for kind of some major questions outside of the elite events. And what somewhat feels like a letdown, and it would normally be big tennis news, the ATP calendar for 2025 came out. What are the highlights? What are the lowlights?
Well, I mean, keep in mind, what we're talking about isn't going to start one way or the other until 2026. So I think people...
The Saudis.
With either
tour.
the Premier Tour or the Saudis. So we've got 18 months here. So I think this calendar came out, and I think people were looking for big, radical, big telltale signs. Nothing, a couple events were missing, a couple events got moved. You talk about the off season. If I'm reading this right, the next gen final in Saudi Arabia. So these are the kids, right? This is the next generation of stars. In theory, these are people who need their rest, who need to pace themselves. The next gen final is the second week of December, presumably, ending around Christmas Eve. So we talk about a 1 month off season. If you are a talented 19-year-old, you get like a 1 week off.
I changed my mind. Blow it all up.
Blow it all up. Exactly. Can I say just on a bit of a, on a 10,000, on a happier note, big picture, you work in media, and as we do, and it is not a growth industry these days. The one thing I think we need to remember here is this is going to add money, and presumably, I mean, who knows what for, but presumably this is going to help increase the tennis ecosystem, right? People want to invest. This is about growth. This is about monetizing at a healthy amount. We've got all these rosy projections. We've got $1 billion from the Saudis. Big picture is this is about tennis growing and not shrinking. It's just a question of what is that growth going to look like? How's it going to be distributed? And is this sport still going to be A, recognizable, and B, palatable to fans and to players? But I do think we need to it's very easy to sort of, tennis is so screwed up and these guys are ruining the sport and what's going to happen to my backyard event. I do think a little bit of pause to say probably a good thing overall that people are looking to park their money in tennis, that people see this as monetized and not something that we need to manage decline is probably worth mentioning.
Yeah, I think that's great. And listen, one of the biggest issues that is not a new problem is the power levers in tennis all exist in silos and operate as almost separate businesses. The ATP, which provides the rankings, which provides the infrastructure, which basically is the year-long support system for what you see during major moments, right? It creates the stage. We make predictions based on the ATP tour before they go to a Grand Slam, but it is a hard business for the ATP. They make most of their revenue on ATP World Tour finals, which they have to put on at the end of the season when players are exhausted to make a lot of the other events work. So these are real issues that need to be addressed. I hope that it isn't viewed as a race to the finish line, and because of that, we end up with an irresponsible result. The thing about it being popular, wanting to be monetized is fantastic. I just hope that everyone is responsible and honest about the parts of the game that they want to see benefit from a potential deal. I understand that, the slams are worth $1 gazillion, and those are some major chess pieces to move. I just hope they care about the rest of it. Similar to ESPN taking or buying all of the slam rights and then saying, we don't, because we have the slam rights, we have the biggest fish. We don't actually need to support the tennis media system leading into those slams. It's like we cut out all the other stuff and we're going to take the prize pieces. I hope that doesn't repeat itself in these bigger deals.
Do you like French cuffs? When you are done with this podcasting thing and ready to leave your hovel, I see a leadership position in your future.
Oh, God.
You upgrade your wardrobe.
Yeah, in many other things.